About Barlow, maybe you did?
I did, yeah, I think you were walking back.
Like Ray Stone?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Baldwin Hills Village was developed using the same planning principles that a lot of the public housing around the country they were doing. So in Southern California, Fred Barlow did the majority of also the public housing projects, sometimes with Catherine Basham as partner. But this was always intended for middle class. From day one it was popular. It was in the Museum of Modern Art show, Made in USA in 1944. So from the very beginning it was written about, analyzed, appreciated. By the 70s, the area around here, after the Watts riots, had sort of changed, and it went condo from 73 to 78. So there were apartments up until that time. One of the major things that changed, the landscape is somewhat different besides the trees than what was planted originally. But on top of the Baldwin Hills to this side, there was an earthen reservoir. In 1963, the dam broke. And so washed all that water, pulled the houses and cars and washed through the village green. So it was about 8 feet underwater for several hours and washed through. Did some major damage in several of the courts to the garage buildings. 2 buildings were sort of severed in 2 and disappeared. They brought back one of the original architects then to oversee the restoration. And so you really can't tell now for the residential buildings, what changed. The garage buildings, when they rebuilt them, were stucco on one side. So a new landscape architect named Merrill Winans came in 1966 when it was fully installed. And starting in the 50s, they had started taking out some of the ground covers and putting in turf and adding more foundation plantings. But after 1966, more uniformly, it was turf in most places. The sidewalks had started going in earlier, but they really redid all the sidewalks with concrete. A lot more complicated plant palette with more subtropical, foundation plantings and more tree and shrubs.
When did it become a national historic monument?
In 1977, it became a City of LA Historic Cultural Monument. In 1993, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2001 became a National Historic Landmark. So it's significant for urban planning, architecture, and landscape architecture. Yeah.
So this complex was much lauded in its time.
Yes.
What were the criticisms that came up, if any? Because I'm sure there were. No, I mean not just. I mean, you're getting a lot of praise for it, but I'm sure there was, detractors.
We've done a pretty exhaustive search of the literature, and
there are little.
I'm sure that there.
Things, but
I'm sure that there are some small things, but not much comes up. A further bit is that one of the shareholders of the original complex, and the original investment, were the Chandlers, who controlled the Los Angeles Times. And so, everything is glowing in the newspaper. And again, when you read the newspaper articles in the Los Angeles Times, you have to take it with a grain of salt because you know that they're connected to the project. But really,
Pencil Points was a major architecture magazine at the time, and Lewis Mumford wrote an introduction to a Catherine Bauer article, which is rather long. And she was here and did a real full analysis. But besides, the drawing yards aren't big enough for...
Yeah, a couple things that, it went immediately into wartime after the design was finalized. So, again, the drying yards weren't quite big enough. Families were segregated to one part of the village green and people without children in another part. So the ones with families had a little bit of trouble finding, they had to sign up for laundry hours, for instance. It was pointed out that where the coral tree is now was a water feature initially. And we get a few reports on why that didn't remain a water feature for very long. So that seemed impractical. There was some talk about adding a swimming pool that the 2 gentlemen here mentioned as well. That didn't go in before wartime, it didn't go in after wartime, and it wasn't drawn on the plans. So, yeah, and actually, this wasn't a criticism, but there were 94 benches that were on the plans. They were supposed to be installed and were not installed. And we don't have any definitive word, but we believe that the FHA garage courts actually had a more of a concrete or concrete asphalt surface, as well as the walkways up to the houses. Those were concrete pavers. But still, the ladies in the 40s were wearing, the fashionable ladies in the 40s, sorry, were wearing open-toed shoes. And so we have anecdotal reports that they were getting was granite in their shoes. So they, you know, that wasn't so good. So I'm not sure that the insurance company took it out because of that, but gradually those were taken out over time, and the flood pretty much finished that off.
My mom wrote that the ladies didn't wear shoes here.
Yeah.
We just went barefoot. We did, didn't we, Chuck? Yeah, we didn't. We take our shoes off in the summer and wouldn't see them until.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up here?
I know.